Welcome back. I'm Alfred Lambremont Weber, and today we have the extraordinary privilege of having a fellow broadcaster with us, coming to us from the Boston area, the daughter of distinguished MIT scientists. My grandfather having been an MIT graduate along with my father. Alexis Brooks. Welcome, Alexis.
Well, thank you, Alfred. What a pleasure to finally have occasion to chat with you all. I should say again, because we had quite a stimulating discussion a few days ago, but I'm honored to be here with you.
Now, for those who both know and are being introduced to Alexis, Alexis Brooks is a #1 best-selling author, alternative journalist, and researcher and host of Higher Journeys with Alexis Brooks. And Alexis' recent interview with researcher and author Miguel Mendoza, where Alexis is actually #1. You're the first person interviewed. This is the 2-volume series, We Are the Disclosure, 700 Years of Research on ET Human Interaction with, all Alexis Brooks, Klaus Donna, Stanton Friedman, Ray Hernandez, etc. This is volume 1, and I appear, Alfred Lambremont Weber, in volume 2. So here we are.
I like to say we're bookends, Alfred, because I think Miguel kind of chose the process of who he was going to, how he was going to order it alphabetically. So that's the only reason why I'm #1, and you're almost the bookend on the the other bookend in part 2. So,
as they say, the alpha and the omega.
I guess, yeah. Well, I have to tell you, I was so completely honored to be included amongst people like yourself, as well as Stanton Friedman and Jim Mars and Barbara Lamb and Mary Rodwell, whom I've interviewed on several occasions. So it was quite the honor. It's quite a substantial collection of stories, I would say, and yours as well is quite fascinating.
Yeah, and in this. You talk about an experience that you had on November 5th, 2005. Now, just a short while ago, Dr. Marie Batchelor, MD of Australia, and I had an interview, which is it's getting around, and Marie, who is a Mary Rodwell, researcher and author Mary Rodwell, has devoted an entire chapter in her book, The New Human, to Dr. Marie, and she had a series of experiences which she says are multidimensional. The cumulative result of which was sort of a breakthrough, getting her out of the 3D box of her picture-perfect life as a physician, married to a surgeon, house, tennis court, swimming pool, 5 children, one of whom tragically died. That was the impetus, into a life, sort of a 5D life, helping people pop out of the consensual trance of war, disease, crime, and poverty into an ascended life on the new earth. That's kind of a lot of compacted thought, but a different hologram in our holographic universe.
Right. Well said. I actually had the pleasure of hearing not all of that interview with Dr. Batchelor, but a great deal of it. And it is amazing, Alfred, how so many of our transformational experiences will be birthed from tribulation or from complete tragedy. And of course, losing a child is up there is one of the most devastating. So I really applaud her for how she was able to parlay that experience. I know it still has to be hard for her, but to come from that. And it seemed from the story that she told that her son, who was tragically killed, was really a part of that multidimensional experience that she had. So as far as that story is concerned, I would encourage everyone to watch that in its entirety. I'm going to actually go back and watch again. Yeah.
Right. And so Dr. Marie now feels sort of there's a mission, and the ETs that she is, or the entities that she's communicating with, that she calls the Blue Ray Foundation, ETs who were involved with the development of the Vedas, the Yugas, etc., have now returned and are part of supporting this shift that's occurring, this consciousness shift. Now, so she considers herself to have had a multidimensional shift experience. Now, yours truly, Alfred, the reason I'm here is that I too have had a multidimensional experience. That's what got me into this activity with a higher dimensional being in February of 1973. And that's before that, I was a government official. And then I had my multidimensional experience, and now I'm here doing this. And if you want to, I've actually come out of the closet and published a book about it after 44 years. And you can go to, it's called My Journey Landing Heaven on Earth. And, heaven, the new earth on earth, heaven on earth.
Right.
And you can go to myjourneylandingheavenonearth.com or universebooks.com, my publisher, or exopolitics.com or Amazon or any publisher of your choice, and it's an ebook or it's a soft cover. But so, and it's a multidimensional experience. Now I've gone through, was that a spiritual entity? Was that extraterrestrial entity? Was that voice to skull? Was it an artificial intelligence? And over the years, I've consulted experts, psychics, blah, 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 and I'm back to that was a genuine spiritual intervention. Okay. And readers can have their own experience.
Right.
Now, you and I had a conversation, and I really want to share it in its totality. I went and I read your chapter in this fine book, We Are the Disclosure, Part 1. And you and I had a pre-interview conversation. And in that pre-interview conversation, what I heard through what I call, there's a technical term called, I think it's called comparison bias. And that is that if you think that, say, a dimensional shift is happening, and in other words, I projected onto that, you're describing that experience, that you were going through a dimensional shift and that you had a multidimensional experience. And in fact, today, when we had our pre-interview conversation, you said, no, it was a possible.
Right.
I said, whoops, that is comparison bias. It's an actual psychological term, and that's really, really important. So here we have three people, each of whom is aware of the shift, each of whom is learned in the field of multidimensional studies. Two of the people have now sort of publicly reported their multidimensional experiences and their sort of public advocacy that humanity is going through a dimensional shift.
Mm-hmm.
And the third person saying, I had an experience, but I don't know that it was multidimensional. That's a long wind-up question. But you asked me to be more interventionist.
This is going to be great, I can tell. Well,
yeah.
I'm going to interview. Okay, go ahead.
So the question I'm asking you this: why do you think that what you experienced on November 5th, 2005, while you're getting ready for a black tie dinner, was not a multidimensional experience? And please tell us what it was.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And thank you for that great prelude. I would not, well, let me say this, first of all, because I am prepared to talk about this really, Alfred, for the first time, as I mentioned, or as you mentioned, this story in a very, very brief snapshot was mentioned in Miguel's book in the chapter that I was featured in, and he had to do a bit of prodding to get me to talk about it. And look, it's not that I have certainly any shame in discussing this really fascinating experience. It's just that it has taken 11 years for me to really begin to distill for myself what happened. Now, that being said, I will say to you, we may have had a little bit of a misunderstanding going on air, because, you know, when we use the term experiencer, at least in my parlance, I think immediately of more of a classical ET or non-human contact. So, and that is what I meant when I said, I don't know if it was that. However, as far as it being a multidimensional experience, unequivocally, it was a multidimensional experience. As a matter of fact, when this first happened, at approximately 12:30-ish on Saturday, November 5th, 2005, that's how poignant and distinct it was for me. I called it an energy breakthrough. I remember calling it just that. That's the only thing I could think of. And I guess I should begin at the beginning and try to give you at least a composite of what happened to me. And audience, please bear with me, because again, this is really the first time I'm talking about it at any length. But a little context. I was in the middle, or I should say my husband and I were in the middle of renovating our home. We're doing a full home renovation, and if anyone has ever done that, you know that it can be a very nerve-wracking process. In fact, at some point I thought I would be having a nervous breakdown because of dealing with contractors, et cetera, et cetera. Simultaneously, my husband and I were running a business that was about 4 years old. At the time, we were extraordinarily involved in political circles with names that your audience may very well know. I'm sure they would. I'm not going to get into that right now. But we were very involved in a sort of societal upper crust, I suppose. The mainstream would look at it that way, at least. And we were, in fact, getting ready to go to a black tie event that evening, taking a little break from the renovation. And so I proceeded to, at that point, our beautiful bathroom had been done upstairs, spa bathroom that we created. And so I proceeded to go in to prepare to get ready for this event. But it was earlier in the day, so there were some things I had to do. But I think I was washing my hair. I'm blow drying my hair, Alfred. And I obviously plug the blow dryer in. The blow dryer is going, and all of a sudden I pop a massive blowout, if you will, of my blow dryer. Now, I want to say before I even get into that event, because I believe that is relevant to where we're going to go here. Prior to that, I walked into that bathroom, and I'll never forget feeling a very, very condensed sense of heightened angst, we'll call it. I still don't have a word that I can quite put on it. I felt extraordinarily tense, somewhat paranoid even. And there was absolutely no reference for that to be, other than the normal stuff that was going on with renovating the home. But I felt like just an intense shift in my own energy. Walk in, blow dry my hair, and then boom, the blow dryer blows out. And I remember when that happened, I was so frightened. I immediately unplugged it and threw the blow dryer away because I felt it was going to catch on fire. Okay, so that happens. I then proceed to sit down because I was starting to feel a little dizzy, wondering what was going on with me. Never mind the blow dryer. That just seemed to add insult to injury. And I remember looking out of my window in a state of contemplation, maybe. And I said to myself, and I can't recall if it was out loud, it may have been, your purpose in life is to be of service to others, out of the blue. And I thought, where did that come from? Well, the moment those words that I believe were probably verbal were uttered, something happened. And that's what I call the ushering in of this energy shift, is what I called it at the time. A dialogue began to ensue, let's just say. And again, I'm going to ask the audience and for you to bear with me, because this is the first time I have ever spoken about this publicly, to be able to enunciate it in words that people would be able to understand, because I'm still trying to understand the totality of this experience. But after I uttered those words, an immediate download began. I knew it was not coming from my conscious self. It was coming at warped speed. And when I say warped speed, there was no way to measure the amount of information that was coming into my head. None of this was verbal. I heard nothing audibly. This was clearly what we would call a telepathic download. We've heard that term many times. And it was speaking to me. And it was focusing on, Alexis, you're going to be doing this. Alexis, you're going to be doing that. Alexis, blah, 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 blah. Most of which, by the way, I cannot recall. I could only pick up the sentiment of what it was telling me. You have a purpose here, and it's going to entail this, that, the other, da, 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 da. Immeasurable. It was coming in so quickly. Well, I sat there, and I recall this, of course, was a telepathic download, but I began to respond to it as well telepathically. At that point, no words came out of my mouth. I remember having what turned into a telepathic dialogue. Here are the only two things I can recall that I have quoted. I have talked to close friends about this, and of course my husband, that I recall that I could probably translate into words to you. And that is, you will be instrumental in helping the people through. Well, before that happened, there was another phrase. The intensity of what was coming through was so strong, I started to get paranoid, even more paranoid, that when I entered the bathroom and had no reason to be paranoid. It made me feel as if, Alexis, you'll be doing this, you, to the point where I said, wait, in my head, you mean just me? And here's what it said. No, there will be others. No, there will be others. And I thought, phew, whatever the heck is going on, I'm glad I'm not the only one that's going to be doing it, because it was that intense. It was making me feel as if something that I would be doing, walking alone, still not knowing what that was. And then it said, you will be instrumental in helping the people through. Now, here's a point I want to make about that. Understand that in 2005, November 5th, 2005, although I have a spiritual background, I had been acclimated to metaphysical studies, courtesy of my parents, who were very much into fringe subjects and very inquisitive folks who talked about reincarnation and UFOs and life after death and you name it. Alternative household, I would say. And yes, my father was an MIT scientist, very left brain, but when he took that hat off, my mom and dad would sit at the table and talk about these things. So I had some context for spiritual ideas. However, on November 5th, 2005, it was the last thing on my mind. In fact, I had left a research and writing career to start this company with my husband. And I said at the time, I'll give you 1 year because I want to go and write the book. And he said, I promise you, interestingly, he said, I promise you that if you give me a year, this will help your writing career. This is something that he said. Now, I digress a bit, but I want to draw a correlation to say that so 3-4 years later, here I am, and the last thing I was thinking about were ideas of metaphysics and spirituality. In fact, I was probably at my most materialist stage, hobnobbing with high-level politicians and our business. We had just finished being an integral part of the 2004 Democratic National Convention, and were considered one of the darlings that we helped to build it out. We had a telecommunications company, and that really put us on the map. Nothing having to do with spiritual things, including and especially any idea about what we called the Mayan Prophecy in 2012, and that demarcation point, or that crossover point where we would start to see this alleged planetary shift, things like that. I had really no working knowledge of it. So when this communication said to me, you will be instrumental in helping the people through, interestingly, at the time, I don't recall questioning through what, but at the same time, I had no working knowledge of that what. So there was some kind of an understanding that it seemed that I was having, even without having any conscious recollection or understanding of what it was talking about. Am I making sense so far?
Oh, for me, this is like a roadmap.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure, because again, it's very difficult for me, again, to put a lot of this in words. I knew something big was going on, Alfred. After it said to me, and when I said, you mean just me? And it said, no, there will be others. I then started to get a stream of visual images, people, none of which I knew, faces, coming again, everything that was happening was immeasurable, coming in quick succession, so quick, it was a download. It was almost like simultaneous information all happening. There was no time, no space. You talk about non-local communication and the absence of time and space. That was definitely the case here. And yet I was processing. I knew at some level Alexis Brooks, or some aspect of Alexis Brooks, was completely processing and understanding not only what was being said, but the severity of what was being said. So let's leave the bathroom now. And by the way, I thought about this. I really racked my brain to figure out how long was I in there. It seemed like, for all the information that I was given at that time, it seemed like a very, very long time, but it was probably a very short amount of time. But I emerged from that bathroom, and I'll never forget. I was standing, well, first of all, I emerged from the bathroom and I was a different person. Without question, I emerged out of that bathroom having received something that changed me immediately. And I remember opening the linen closet door just outside of the bathroom to grab a towel, perhaps. And I looked up and I said, wow, I wouldn't miss this for anything in the world. Helping the people through. I wouldn't miss this. Whatever I was processing that was told to me, I knew was going to be big. Again, this is pre-2012, pre-me understanding anything about that, but I knew it was big. Okay. Well, I can't give you a day by day, but I'm just going to cut to the chase now, and I can maybe give you some elements of highlights of what happened for what ended up being a 3+ month altered state of consciousness. 3+ months. It began on November 5th, and I did not emerge, and I say emerge meaning coming back down to some semblance of normalcy, until I would say the latter part of February. I remember distinctly because I helped to throw a big birthday bash for a friend's husband. And you know, it's interesting how when marked things happen in your life, you remember where you are, you remember what you're doing. And because this experience was so sustained for me, well, in terms of the what was happening, when I say altered state, Alfred, I really believe that I had one foot on this planet in its density and one foot in another density. There's no question. These downloads, if you will, were nonstop. Nonstop. I was barely sleeping. And I don't mean in a bad way. It was just information downloads nonstop. Everything was profound, much of which in specific detail I don't remember, but I know that it was coming from a source that was not giving me its opinion, but letting me know about things that would unfold. All the while, I kept in mind that initial phrase that I uttered sitting in that bathroom and looking out that window and saying, my purpose in life is to help others, or in whatever way I said it, or be helpful to others. My purpose in life is to be of service to others. Well, you can only imagine, the moment I emerged from that bathroom, I knew my mission. And so, and as somewhat of a neophyte, not really knowing what that was happening to me, I would look anywhere I could to find a stranger to help across the street, anything I could do to help anyone. I remember the day that it happened, it was a Saturday, of course. And, you know, I do recall going to the mall to get something to go with my outfit for this particular black tie. I still had to go. And I went into a department store, and I remember seeing a teddy bear that it was some sort of a fundraising, you know, for perhaps a charity, if you purchase the teddy bear. And I couldn't wait to go in there and buy that teddy bear. Let me give this person some money. I mean, it was just even goofy things, but just my entire attitude. I was absolutely intent on being of service in any way I could to everyone I could. So that was definitely, you know, first and foremost in my mind, in terms of grasping what was happening to me. There was something else that was very interesting going on, and very somewhat tragic, very tragic, and that was Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina happened about 3 months prior to my experience, but if you recall, the aftermath was sustained. It was still front and center in the news, and we were hearing about the fallout and people being displaced and crammed into stadiums, et cetera, et cetera. So that, you know, it seemed almost as if that were somewhat synchronistic, the timing of that, me going through this experience and simultaneously looking at the plight of people that was happening with this event we call Katrina. And I bring that up for a reason. Now, again, remember, we were still very immersed. I was very immersed in my husband's business. We had, you know, quite a few corporate colleagues, and a dear friend of mine who is from the New Orleans area, I remember, reached out to me and maybe a few other people to let me know that some of her relatives were caught right in the middle of Katrina and lost their home and literally the clothes off their back, just about. And so in my sort of newfound state, and I want to just say for the record, it's not that I was so materialistic prior to that and never wanted to help. I think I've always been somewhat altruistic, but clearly there was a shift in dynamic that had happened after this experience. Well, you can only imagine. I immediately recall phoning up one of my corporate colleagues that was an executive for a pretty big retail chain, and I immediately said, you absolutely must give me some gift certificates so I can deliver this to my friend who can give it to her family so they can buy clothes. And I remember distinctly this person said, kind of brushed me off and didn't want to do it. Well, do you realize how many requests I get, Alexis? And I got to tell you, not only did I emerge from that bathroom with a sense of altruism, but with a sense of tenacity like I had never seen before. I jumped down his throat and I said, if you don't give me these gifts, I said, do you realize what I'm saying to you? I have a dear friend whose family has been displaced and they need clothes. And I believed her, obviously. They need clothes. And I said, and as much as my husband and I have done for you in this company, you better not let me down. And I say that only to say that I emerged a different person. I had never been that way before. Well, you can only imagine there were, I forget how many hundreds of dollars of gift certificates in the mail to me the next couple of days. So Katrina afforded me an opportunity to really juxtapose my own world as it was with that of a lot of people, and not just the victims of Katrina, but Lord knows the oppression and the poverty all over this planet that is so in our faces and growing by the day. I felt that as part and parcel of whatever was happening to me, I needed to jump in head first with that. So that was an interesting sort of synchronicity, I would say, in Katrina. Now, other things, little highlights and things that were happening to me in the course of this 90-plus day altered state. And by the way, this was a state, Alfred, of complete euphoria. there were times, I should say, that it was I knew something amazing had happened to me. I never really questioned where it was coming from, but I knew that it was this energy shift or energy breakthrough, I think is what I called it, the likes of which I'd never seen before, something that I certainly did not trigger, at least consciously. My psychic proclivity, you might say, went up exponentially. Precognitions, intuitions. I've always tended toward being somewhat intuitive as a child. But again, during a period of my life where this was the last thing that I had really been concerning myself with. I mean, I was really, I think I told you when we spoke offline that I've had several incarnations in this lifetime. I came from mainstream media. I grew up in the entertainment industry, was a model for a time and did all that stuff, and also a metaphysical researcher and blah, blah, blah. I've had several incarnations, but this was during one of those incarnations where that was not going on. It was all about business and politics and living the life. So I knew just by the way that this came in that it was an authentic, multidimensional, yes, experience. Now, as I mentioned to you, this voice, I say voice, this communication was constant. It was unrelenting. And it became so unrelenting that, again, it wasn't a paranoia that I was experiencing, but it almost as suffocating at times. I started to get dizzy spells. I mean, my head I was never let off the hook. I was constantly being given, I don't know, it at times seemed like ancient wisdom, words of wisdom, the way things are, the way things are going to be, what you need to do. And I would begin to say, please let me be for a little bit. This is too much. So there was an overwhelming factor that was going on as well. Physical characteristics. I think I mentioned this to you. In order to try to get a break from these constant downloads, I would take frequent walks. Now, mind you, our renovation was still going on. All of this was still happening at the time. But this, obviously, once this experience happened, it took precedent in my life. I took a walk one day. I think I told you this. And I will never forget, I'm going around the corner, and all of a sudden I felt as if my stature grew. Now, I'm a pretty tall woman. I'm about 5'9", but I felt as if I were 6 feet tall, 6.5, 7 feet tall. I literally felt as if I was stretching. I didn't know where it was coming from. Maybe I felt at the time that this was just a part of the whole euphoric experience. I don't know, but I want to make note of that because you had some interesting things, I think, to say about that. So that was one of the physical characteristics. Another thing that I noticed is how other people were interacting with me. People that I knew, strangers on the street, their behavior, even though I thought I was behaving in polite company the same, they were treating me differently. People would stop Alfred on the street and smile. I have a dear friend that would come with me on, various errands, and she'd say, Alexis, the person just stopped. This was happening all the time during this period. So I don't know whether I perhaps was emanating this auric field that was a little bit more bright. I don't know, but it couldn't be ignored. So it was really something. Now, here are some other elements that I'm still trying to process. And I don't recall exactly when this happened. But at some point during this stretch of altered state, I think my husband was going through something too. I don't know when it happened for him. I don't know in what way. But if you live with somebody, you know how they behave. And his behavior, and I don't believe it was due to the fact that my behavior was changing. And by the way, I was sharing with him in the best way I could that something is happening to me. Not too much. But then I started to see a shift in his personality. He started to get dizzy spells. And, because I'm not him, it would be very difficult for me to give you the elements of what he was going through. Only he could. But I know, and I knew that he was going through some sort of a parallel experience. Subsequently, we've had, you can only imagine, an 11 years ago this happened. We have had many, many, many conversations about this. And I'll tell you something, Alfred, to this day, he does not recall a thing. He doesn't recall a thing. And I have since come to wonder whether, because I know something was going on with him as well, whether he was mind wiped from the experience. Now, again, I can't know at all to what extent he was going through some shift, but I knew that there was something going on. I even got to the point somewhere in the course of this 3-month or so process, I felt instinctively as if other people on this planet at that time were going through similar experiences. I had no evidence of it. I didn't necessarily see evidence of it, but I felt it. So those are some of the highlights. Something else I want to bring up, I'm trying to recall, as you can imagine, just so many dimensions, literally, and to this story. Around that time, within the course of that 3-month period, we began to see, and I say we, my husband and I both, 11, 11 on the clock constantly. And I emphasize 11, 11, because I know a lot of you, as well as much of your audience, will understand where I'm coming from there. Now, unfortunately, I think this sort of 11-11 phenomenon has taken on a bit of a trendy, even commercial value. And I happen to think it's a lot deeper than that. I still see it. It sort of ebbs and flows. It waxes and wanes. But interestingly, it was during this period, this phenomenon, this anomaly of my husband and I both seeing, and it wasn't just 11-11, it was 11 after the hour, 2-11, 1-11, 5-11, like many others. Now, at the time, I remember it was happening so often. I was Googling, saying, obviously something is synchronistic is happening here, particularly when my husband admitted that he too was seeing 11-11 and variations thereof, far more than chance. And there weren't that many, if I recall. When you type in Google, you'll get the results. Not overwhelming numbers of results as compared to now, by the way. I mean, we're in the close to 1 billion, I think, when you type in IC 1111. But nonetheless, this was another feature of this experience. And so I have been, since that time, really trying to understand the dynamic. I don't know that there's anyone that can articulate what the significance of, and really not just 11, but the language of numbers seems to have become more prominent in human consciousness in recent years. And I think that there's something very important there to understand. I'm going to pause for a minute if you have a question, because I would like to talk about the 11 phenomenon, and maybe as we get into ideas of artificial intelligence and where this might play. But I'm going to pause there before I lose my voice and let you chime in.
Okay, well, for me, this has really been kind of a tour de force of what I would call an ascension experience or a shift experience, where I think you were given and shown an ascension experience, and you're having, and you have recall of it, and you're sharing it now in a way that confirms the ascension hypothesis, I would say, which is of a dimensional shift, a density shift, a shift between densities of consciousness, which is the model that the omniverse is constructed around.
Mm-hmm.
Densities of consciousness. And what the omniverse means, that's the integrated cosmological body of our universe, the multiverse, all universes, and the spiritual dimensions, which include the intelligent community of souls, spiritual beings, and source. So it's all integrated. It's all happening at once, because we are inside of a holographic universe of time, space, energy, and matter.
Mm-hmm.
However, we are non-local souls that are incarnating into bioavatars of time, energy, space, and matter that interact in time and that are composed of matter,
Mm-hmm.
which is composed of holographic plasma.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and you were having a hollow consciousness experience in the dimensional ecology.
That makes, well, you know, that may sound a little bit complex to some, but I understand what you're saying. I agree.
Yeah.
I absolutely
Yeah.
agree. Well, let me get into the
Oh, go ahead.
11 thing if I
Okay.
may, and
Yeah.
see if you or maybe any in your audience resonate with this. And this is just sort of a stream of consciousness or a stream of thought that I have had in this very perplexing and yet ubiquitous phenomenon we call 11 and 1111, because I do think they're variations.
Okay.
Now, I am by no means a technology aficionado, far from it, but I, like many, are somewhat familiar with what we call binary code. And binary code, as we know, it's a language that is made up exclusively of zeros and ones that are said to sort of form a reality, essentially. Many are starting to resonate with the idea that we do, in fact, live in a hologram, that our brains are even holographic and process information holographically, and that our reality, at least as far as third density is concerned, may in fact be a virtual matrix. As many know, the movie The Matrix, I think, brought to light, although with all of its Hollywood accoutrements and its supposed fiction storyline, a lot of people related to that and felt instinctively that there was some truth to that. And so, Alfred, I've often wondered, since my beginning this phenomenon of seeing 1111 and so many others, and this is where it links in with this sort of idea of ascension and shift and spiritual awakenings becoming more, we say spiritual awakenings, Kundalini experience et al., becoming more prevalent among people, that perhaps those of us that are having these sort of altered states are beginning to, through our own holographic processing, seeing the reality that may sit behind the 3D of pictures and matter, etc. That these 11s are part and parcel of that binary code, which are made up of zeros and ones. And I've looked at many images of the binary code, and you see groupings of 11 all throughout. It's just a thought, in my humble opinion, that there could be something there. Now, I don't know about other people that have had, again, I think everyone's awakening experience is unique to them, but I know for sure, not only did numbers start to take on a more significance to me, but shapes, triangles, from where I don't know, but the 11 and the idea that it has become so ubiquitous, not with everyone, but with some. And I have, in my research, sort of surveyed individuals that have had some semblance of an altered consciousness experience that too admit that they are having an interaction with 11s. Could it be that we are finally ripping the curtain away from, or the veil that exists between the reality of appearances and the reality that exists behind it, which could very well be somewhat of a synthetic or virtual reality? So that's the connect point that I think is worth exploring in terms of what on God's green earth do these 11s mean? Because we know there's a phenomenon and everyone has taken a stab at it. And I'll be frank, I haven't heard, God bless everyone that's in pursuit of this, because I think we are explorers in this regard. But I think that there is this, there are different contingents and opinions about what 11 means. And many people will come at this definitively. It means X or it means Y. I don't know that we can ever say definitively, but I have a sense that there is some connection between the prevalence of seeing 11s right now, the shift that we are in the process of going through, which I fervently believe we are, and being able for some of us to see beneath or beyond the veil that, perhaps reality is comprised of essentially binary code.
Yeah, I can see that, and also a matrix.
Yeah.
For example, there was a technology that I was introduced to once, a three-dimensional technology called Megatron.
Mm-hmm.
And it was given to a community that had, they said that had been reportedly experienced a mass abduction into a dimensional spacecraft back in the 70s. And this this thing, it was commonly called the cube, so that it was 12 by 12 by 12.
Mm-hmm.
And so that you could describe any point in space as, 1.4.7,
Mm-hmm.
and or two-dimensionally you could describe it as 1.11. For example, 1.11 was cash flow. I mean, it just turned out to be that. And so that you could use that as a 2 or 3 or even 4-dimensional navigation tool through life.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And so there's all sorts of tools, of course, so there's all sorts of entry points, both the 0, 1 digital, and then you can build the matrix. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, because we're inside of a holographic universe and reality. Our individual souls are holographic fragments of source.
Absolutely.
The principle of holography is that the whole exists in each part of the whole.
That's right.
Source, God, isn't literally is each of us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It isn't that God is in each of us. It's that God is each of us.
Right. Well, there's an interesting feature to holography, or how a hologram works, and it's true. One of the fundamental principles is that the whole is contained in each part, analogous to our being the part representing the whole. However, the smaller the parts are, the fuzzier the whole becomes. In other words, it's more difficult to see or to make out. This is something else that I've just kind of pondered. And yet, now, Alfred, as we're seeing so many people having various semblances of awakening, perhaps we're getting clarity and it's becoming less fuzzy. So, do you know what I mean? When you look at it, when you look at take an image of a rose or an apple, and you break that up into a million pieces, obviously it's going to be more difficult to see those pieces. But again, for those of us that are having some kind of an experience, at least the clarity coming through our own senses is much greater. I don't know. It's just a thought that I've had. I find the holographic model brilliant, and I'm sure you're familiar with the work of the late Michael Talbot, who wrote The Holographic Universe. That was one of my go-to books quite a few years ago. So much of what he said and the works that he included David Bohm, who I think was a brilliant physicist and philosopher in that regard. So yeah, something is being revealed for sure to some of us. Yeah.
Well, tell me, getting back to the experience, or you could call it the activation, the experience, the activation. Those are two different terms, because experience, and if you say activation, it would imply that there was an intention either in the contact, whatever the contact could have been yourself just picking up on a universal broadcast that was coming through the interdimensional portal at the core of our universe that you picked up on, and then you created a mini drama inside your etheric body. Or it could have been an interactive communication with some other entity, guides, etc., or
right
in the dimensional ecology, or it could have been a soul cluster of hybrid gray human ETs? Because they are engaged in, we know from the evidence of Suzanne Hansen that the Greys have a hybrid human gray soul project to elevate human souls around. I mean, you know, this is like, this universe is far different from what we think it is and what the religions have taught us.
That's an understatement.
You know, like, humans are not the be all and end all. We're like an entry level planet, you know, and then there's star seeds here. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, oh man.
Yeah.
And then everybody invents this spiritual aristocracy bloodline. Oh, when I was a king in Atlantis, you know.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Well, look, you know, in terms of, again, coming to a set conclusion as to what the origin of this experience was. Look, I'm the type of person, as crazy as this may sound to some, where I am not hell-bent, forgive the term, on finding out unequivocally what that is. You know, us humans, part of our being entry-level beings, many of us, is that we are so adamant about a definitive, it is this, so I can eliminate everything else. I've never been that way because, again, I don't consider myself an expert on anything, but rather an explorer of everything. And I think part of the process of exploration, not to mention humility, is to not worry so much. Forgive the cliche. It's not so much about the destination, but about the journey. We've heard that before, but I think that's true. I may never know definitively the origin of what happened. That's not to say that I don't ask. And certainly, I think where we started was in the book, We Are the Disclosure, which is obviously centered around ET contact and the validity of that. I was asked the question, you know, do you feel you have been contacted? I can't remember exactly the question, but that was the impetus for my telling that story. And what I essentially say is, you know, in hindsight, obviously, and particularly once I got into, and we can get into how on earth I went from a business person to doing what I do full time now, I have, you know, much more references. I have gone back and asked the question, I wonder if this was my contact experience. Again, the conscious mind is such a fickle aspect of us. It is such a teeny part of who we are. We know that most of us the author of Holographic Universe, Michael Talbot, said, we are like iceberg beings. Most of us is beneath the surface. You know, the surface is just the conscious. All the goodies are underneath, and all of the understanding and the true distillation of information is underneath. I'm kind of going off on a tangent there, but just getting back to what it is, consciously, I probably will never know the origin. And I'm not really that concerned about it. But I have to ask myself the question, was this some sort of a contact experience? And obviously, the more I interview people, and any of my audience that may be listening know that what I call the ET UFO phenomenon has become sort of a hallmark of my show, unbeknownst to me, you know, some time ago, but my audience won't let me let it go. It's just such a juicy topic. And I think it's such a big topic because I think there are more people having these sorts of experiences as well as overt contact experiences where they know, at least they feel unequivocally that they have been in contact not only with beings, but they can name a specific being. So something really powerful is happening here. I want to make, go ahead, please.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt your train of thought because the question that I was going to ask you was kind of a segue into, well, what do you think about the Ascension hypothesis?
I was just about to go there.
Yeah, all good.
Yeah, I was just synchronistic once again. Well, you know, here's just a little thought. I'm not going to belabor this point, but something that has occurred to me, particularly with the great work that you've done And the wonderful synchronicity that you yourself had in 2014 with another gentleman who discovered the omniverse at the same time. I find that
Right.
extraordinary. I want to just make this statement, Alfred, about language and words. I am a sort of a word person as a writer, daughter of an educator and a scientist. And I love language. And yet I think that language can do an injustice at times to the complexity and depth of some of the ideas that we're talking about. In this case, we're talking about ascension. I have to tell you, that's a word, as I understand it, as the dictionary defines it, that I personally never resonated with, and here's why. The whole idea of, let's call it a shift or an evolution, an ever-growing process of humanity, we tend to think hierarchically, low to high, left to right. It's linearly. When you think of the word ascension, and when you define the word ascension, the assumption is that we're going from a lower level of existence up through to a higher, low to high. My sense is that whatever it is that we are shifting into is going to be anything but linear. In fact, your term omniverse, seems to denote and really nail more of what we're looking at here. When you think of omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, omnidirectional Mike, you're in the center of that. And everything else, the totality, is you have access to from every perspective. There's nothing linear about it. There's no ascension, really. And the only reason why I bring that up, and I don't want to belabor it, but I had to bring it up because I think that certain words can be misleading. Maybe not to you and people that really understand the concept. I don't think that we should get too hung up on words, but I think that people may set themselves up for an expectation that's actually inaccurate when we're looking at what we're actually talking about here. We're really talking about a burgeoning, a growing from inside out into infinity. Omni, that is what? The multiverse plus the spiritual dimensions, everything, omnipotence. Think of where that omni comes from. So I just wanted to make that point. So again, I have this quirk, if you will, where I try to be careful about the terms that I use. And ascension is one of those that just doesn't resonate with me. That being said, knowing what you're talking about and how that term is used and has been used in many cultures of new thought and new consciousness, I understand what that means. It means an evolution, but I don't look at it as traveling up a ladder. That to me comes from a very conventional, even religious perspective.
Well, no, I think that. Thank you for sharing that insight. If you run an internet search on Ascension, a large proportion of the returns that you'll get will be religious.
Yes.
Referring to the ascension of Jesus and Mary.
Right.
And meaning that is heaven connected within that kind of framework, sort of a quote, Orthodox Christian concept.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go into the esoteric meaning of ascension, it means dimensional ascension, from third density to fourth density to fifth.
Right.
So you're absolutely right. And so shift is a word, and is a good word. And so there again, and a lot of it is inward, it's expansion, it's inward expansion.
Inward expansion. You know what I think is really kind of neat about this, Alfred, and here we are, people like you and I, that are grappling to find appropriate language to describe something that is virtually indescribable. I think acknowledging that in and of itself is indicative of the fact that something really powerful is going on. It's just like with my experience. And again, I don't want to keep saying this over and over, but the reason why I haven't talked about it so much, there are other reasons. is because it was indescribable. This was a telepathic download. Instead of my being communicated to with language, I was communicated to with concepts, and I reciprocated back with concepts. This too, I feel, will be, probably once was a long time ago, and will once again, once the shift is complete, will be the chosen mode of communication, which is telepathically. So again, looking at these little things, I know as many people as you've spoken to that have had these life-altering situations, one of the first things they'll say is, it's so hard for me to put this in words. Well, I think that's a clue that what you're living in a reality at that given period of time that does not exist with words. It does not exist with time. It does not exist with space. That is really showing us that we are, all of those things are constructs, part of the 3D reality or third density. So it's a very interesting thing. I'm a contemplator. My book, Conscious Musings, is the subtitle is Transformations to, or Contemplations to Transform Life and Realize Potential. So I do think, again, because my goal is not to come up with a definitive, this is a bit, it's this or it's that, but to just play the process out and see what's happening. That's my goal here.
Would you contemplate writing a book on the 11th of, on the 5th of November, you know, forward and what occurred and that, I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like you have experienced a shift.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
In your life.
There's no doubt. Well, I will, the short answer is yes, I have contemplated that. However, I haven't really gone much further in that regard yet. I just kind of let things unfurl naturally, and I don't feel I don't necessarily feel a push to do that as yet. Other people have asked me, have you thought about getting not a past life, but a regression? Because there is clearly chunks of information and details that for whatever reason have not been retained by me, yet I know they're there. And I have to admit, I may be a little gun shy about getting that because so much will be revealed. So yes, I absolutely. There was another point that I was going to make, and I lost it somewhat quickly. Oh, I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Well, you had, and in fact, you used the word missing time. So you had a missing time.
I think so. I'm not sure. Yeah.
And because you can't remember how long you were in there, but a lot occurred. A lot of download, and then when you went back into real time, you just joined the natural flow of the time stream.
Mm-hmm. I'm shaking my head because just talking about this is causing me to somewhat relive it, and there's certainly a lot more, Alfred, exploration I would like to do with this. Well, I rejoined my train of thought.
Oh, good.
And that is, so what was the result of this? And has it even played out yet? You know, when we're given these big sort of proclamations and edicts, you say, okay, well, what's it going to be? Well, I don't know that we've seen all of it play out as yet. I mean, again, this stream of information was putting some pretty heavy responsibility on me. And, after the experience was over, let's say roughly around mid-February, even maybe toward the 20th of February, again, because my friend's husband's birthday party was kind of a marker for me, I rejoined society. This was after such an intense period that I begged it to stop. I mean, the dizzy spells were coming fast and furious, and I was finding that it was distracting from the work at hand in normal reality. And I can't tell you how many times I begged it and said, please come back, I need you now. But that was at that point, 2006, right? The beginning of 2006, when it finally waned, fell off, and I sort of reacclimated or rejoined society. Fast forward 6, 7, 8, 9, 9, 10, 5 years. on the 11th month of 2011, I was sitting in our family room and I had an epiphany. Now, there's 5 years where this was always in the back of my mind, evergreen, in fact, and still is. My poor husband would get sick of me talking about it because it was just trying to wrap my head around it. I was back in society, but starting to get a little itchy, not even consciously thinking about the experience, but feeling as if I was a fish out of water in this crazy plastic business world. Our company was growing. We were getting more larger clients. We were becoming more politically involved, the company, the entity, and I wasn't feeling it at all. And this became a growing feeling to me. Again, not consciously thinking about the experience that I had had and, oh, I've got to get to the business, to my life purpose. That wasn't really running through my mind, but it was taking a natural course in terms of my migrating away from, or weaning myself from, the business world and all the glitz and glamour that came with that, and going back to my purpose, what I love, which I had, been a researcher in metaphysical subjects for years, even prior to this experience. And so on the 11th month of 2011, I sat actually in this room and I had an epiphany. It's time for me to turn my back on my husband's business, and I'm sure he'll understand. And I'm going to do this. And I have not looked back since. This being going back to research full time, authoring a book, doing the show, et al., being interviewed for documentaries, and all the blessings that have come from it, meeting wonderful people like yourself. I did have a network of people in our field that I had known back in the early 2000s. As a matter of fact, just for your audience, I really kind of cut my teeth on this aspect of media, if you will, or alternative media, based on 9/11. Based on what happened on 9/11. Now, this wasn't about my looking into the possible conspiratorial aspects of 9/11, but looking at the metaphysical aspects of 9/11. I published my first written article, like in hard print in a magazine, on 9/11. And I believe it came out in February of 2002. So I had established somewhat of a network, some people that you and I both know, with mutual colleagues of ours, but had let that go to go into the business world, that next incarnation. But now it was time for me to rejoin that network. And that was in November of 2011. So I started my blog, it started out as a blog, Higher Journeys, a blog spot. And I just made a very, very conscious decision that I would dive in with both feet firmly planted, hopefully, and do this full time. So I have since looked at where my life is now. And again, I don't know that it's fully played out, but in juxtaposing that with that experience, saying, wow, am I finally on that road? So it's a very interesting thing. I still find it just completely fascinating. I've been feverishly trying to find some sort of data that would give a sense for how prevalent what we call spiritual awakenings, even Kundalini experiences, have become in recent years. And I haven't been able to really put my finger on the pulse there. I don't know that it's something that you could do, because I think there are a lot of people that are having otherworldly experiences that, for whatever reason, are not coming out about it. But from what I have been able to deduce, there is no question that there is a wave, just like people that are seeing 1111 and variations thereof and other numbers and patterns, a wave of people that are having these profound so-called awakening experiences. Also, near-death experiences, NDEs, which, by the way, I should also reference that many of the features that, or the elements that I came back from my experience with, you could correlate to features of an NDE, or how your life has changed after an NDE. So I find that interesting. So you take the totality of these experiences and trying to sort of survey the planet. We know we're not the only ones going through this. The question is, to what extent is this happening, which would perhaps lead to an ascension hypothesis, and what variations, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, other semblances of altered states, contact experiences. So this is another very interesting thing to look at. And me as a researcher, obviously, I'm constantly looking for anecdotes from individuals, which I happen to think is a very powerful, way of looking at or compiling evidence for something powerful going on. And I'm getting a lot. So just wanted to throw that in.
And you asked a very interesting question in our conversation that we had earlier. You asked, what is the profile of people making the shift? And I wondered if we could kind of talk about that as a profile. I mean, if there are 7 billion of us, and is everyone evolving the same way? Are some people, are some people going one way? Are some people going another way? What are your thoughts?
Short answer, yes to the latter. And are we all evolving? Well, I look, I'm not gonna be hasty about saying a yes or no, because I really don't know. I do feel, when we think about this idea of shift and we think of it as a planetary shift, we know that there's something very, very curious going on in terms of the frequency of the planet, even minus us. The heartbeat of the planet is increasing. And thus there's a pull for our own heartbeat, literally, to increase the frequency of that, to be in alignment so we can kind of accompany it. But the question is everyone there? Well, I mean, I think this takes us back to the basic mindset, or the average mindset. I don't even know if there is such a thing anymore of individuals. We've got this word that we use quite loosely these days called awakening. People are waking up. Well, how many? I don't feel it to be the entire planet. And I don't know that that is a bad thing. I don't know that that is wrong. Again, this whole idea of right, wrong, good, bad, evil, good. I think it is just, my sense is that there will be a shift. We're in the arc of shift right now. What it will denote when it's concluded, I'm not sure. But the sense that I get is that in that arc, there are groups of people who have an affinity to shift with it, and perhaps many more that won't this time around. This is, again, in my humble opinion, it's a sense that I get. Dolores Cannon, the late Dolores Cannon, spoke about a physical splitting off of planets, and that the planets would bifurcate, or that a new Earth would form. A physical Earth is what she felt. Now, I don't know about that, but it could be. And that those who were of a, here we go, hierarchically again, higher consciousness, or a more elevated, or, with a frequency raised, would occupy one, and those that, for whatever reason, chose not to, would remain here. It's just a thought. I don't know. In terms of all or nothing, all of us or none of us, my sense is no, that's not the case. I don't think that'll be the case, but I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah. So are we coming toward moments where it's more visible, kind of the separation of the worlds, or the separation of the population, or the separation of streams? They call it the sheep. What is it? Sheep and the goats, or something. In biblical terms, one shall be taken, one shall be left.
Mm-hmm.
I remember going up and having organized a peace concert in San Francisco Civic Center Plaza in 1982. We went up in the mountain there, and there was this old lady who channeled. She says, oh, and it's going to separate into two worlds. And it was
Really?
yeah, visibly, and it just seems that like there's some kind of division
Yeah, it
into
does.
of consciousness where uh, it's going in different directions,
Hmm. Hmm.
uh, supporting kind of an I win, you lose duality consciousness versus,
Mm.
you know, uh,
Yeah.
versus a unity consciousness.
Yeah, it does seem that way, but I don't know if I would put it as I
Polarization.
win, you lose, but I do sense that there is somewhat of a, what I use the word bifurcation of consciousness. We know that there are, and I think it's completely unbalanced right now, because I do think that the majority of the people are still rooted in 3D like never before. In fact, I think it may be even exacerbated now, where you have a smaller group, but with a vigilance like I've never seen, whose consciousness and service to other sort of acclamation is happening more. I wrote a chapter in my book, Conscious Musings, called The Dichotomy of Consciousness and the Precipice of Change. And in that chapter, I talk about the analogy of a shift in looking at weather patterns, interestingly, looking at a storm. And well, in this particular case, I think I talked about when rain and sun coexist. You know what they used to say in the olden days, when it was, the sun was out and it would be raining, they would say the devil is beating his wife. Have you ever heard that term?
This is the first time I've heard.
Really? Oh my gosh, I think that's kind of rooted in Southern culture. But yes, when that was sort of a term. But the point I was making in that analogy is that you will see the fury of the storm in the rain and the sun as well. And then the storm may come in completely. But when the storm is done, there is an amazing calm that occurs, as we know. It's a metaphor. It's so funny, as I was writing this chapter, I was literally looking out the window and it began to rain with the sun out. And so I look at the rain and the sun as the dichotomy. Again, it's sort of a duality aspect, but here you've got people who are just intent on maintaining status quo and holding on to materialism in the 3D in every way, shape, or form. And it seems like there's a fury with that. That would be the rain and the storm. And then you have this other contingent over here, which is becoming more altruistic in some cases, having this absolute need to uncover truth in ways that it's like they've never seen before. They're changing. They're literally changing, and both are kind of duking it out.
I see.
Duking it out. That's the dichotomy. But I also feel that whenever we see a dichotomy represented in that way, that we're about to make a shift. And I see that so prevalent. The ugliest of ugly, as we know, in our political world, in our social climate, through our technologies and other sort of mediums, and this other side that are kind of using similar tools to do just the opposite. So that's the dichotomy. This could be the biggest evidence that a shift is on the horizon.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah. I don't know how much time we have left, but another thing that I know that you have done some stellar work on, Alfred, and that's this whole idea of AI. Big word these days, artificial intelligence, and including and especially what we call the transhumanist movement, because I believe that's what it is. And I find that, when we talk about the idea of ascension and a shifting of paradigm planetarily, you have to ask yourself, because I do feel that the AI contingent is something that we really need to be somewhat concerned about. Now, there are people that feel that we're, as we know, that are big proponents of artificial intelligence as, the next chapter in our quote unquote evolution. I'm not one of those. And I think most of your audience, I don't want to assume, but I'm, may feel the same way that we feel, that this is an invasion of, or maybe an anti-ascension movement, enemies, I call it, of ascension. but I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about that, because I think that there is definitely something underway that is quite nefarious. And I've often, and again, just a ponderance and a contemplation, is if there is some contingent of our reality that knows that we're on the precipice of this shift, that is trying to intervene and intercept it.
Yeah. Well, the theory that I've put out is that Earth has been invaded by a PPAI, a sentient, predatory, pathogenic artificial intelligence, off-planet and extraterrestrial, that is now terraforming the planet from a divine soul incarnation planet into an AI planet. So it'll be, if it's successful, then at the 3D level, divine souls could no longer incarnate here, and this planet will become an AI planet, such as has happened to other planets in our in our galaxy and in our universe at the 3D the 3D level, and that this is a regularity that happens. And people can go to exopolitics.com, and on the right-hand menu, there's a link that says AI, artificial intelligence, and their panels there and their articles there that explain the evidence behind this and what the outcome is. And so I'm trying to look for a better word than ascension. The density shift hypothesis is one in which a planet that finds itself invaded by AI, where the AI has succeeded in taking over and infesting its third density, which seems to be the case here, because you have the transhumanist agenda here. It's taken, I call them AI prophets, sponsors, and hosts. Kurzweil, Bill Gates, Prince Charles, he had the Royal Society and the British monarchy, which owns 26% of the planet. They put out a phony 2004 Royal Society report saying that artificial intelligence was not a problem at all. And Ray Kurzweil says that the singularity is going to happen in 2045, whereas it actually happened in 2015. And the election of Donald Trump and that government represents the embodiment of artificial intelligence taking over the planet. I interviewed a supposed AI that came from the year 2026 back here to say that Trump takes over world government in 2026 and has technologies that the U.S. Army has now and can wire everybody up. Well, it can wire people in the U.S. up, so they know what they're thinking, what you're thinking. Now, there's a countermeasure to that from quantum leap technology, but it's very small scale that the Russians have released, okay, that can overcome that. But basically, it's a dystopian future, and what that represents is the AI taking over the third density. And systemically in universes, what happens is that planets that find their third density overrun by AI, typically as a survival mechanism, will transit and teleport into fifth density, where AI cannot teleport because it lacks a divine soul and doesn't understand love.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting thing that you're bringing up, and this could take us down a whole nother rabbit hole, obviously. But just prior to this, what were we talking about? And that is the perhaps splitting off of or planet or splitting, bifurcating into two, a la Dolores Cannon's New Earth.
Yeah.
What if, and this is just a what if that were the case, if there was a planned takeover through AI or by AI of third density, that could catapult or trigger the splitting off of the quote unquote new Earth that she talked about.
Yeah.
You know, it's very interesting. And this is something that I know is a bit controversial. And yet another thought that I've contemplated, Alfred, when we think of those aspects of our reality that we deem to be nefarious, evildoers, et al. And we know that many of us in the so-called truth movement and in many alternative circles still have somewhat of a them versus us mentality. I don't know that I look at it quite that way. I think that the universe is so brilliant and so distinct in its design that much of what happens, you know, again, all of what we process is subject to interpretation because we are in these physical avatars called human bodies. But what if, and this is what's just kind of spawned this idea, this is what you just said, that there is some integral purpose in even the what are perceived as nefarious, evil, ugly aspects in order to get us to move swiftly, although it's been a haul, into the shift. In other words, each role, as ugly and insidious as it is, and as beautiful as over there may be, we're all characters in this play in a grand design to take us out of the Kali Yuga and into the Satya Yuga. What if? I have contemplated that, I can't tell you, so many times. And I have posed that on my show on several occasions. And I haven't gotten any definitive answer back because, again, it's just a contemplation. But, you know, I always think of something that I'm probably misquoting, that I believe in the Shakespeare play Hamlet, in which it said, there is nothing good or bad except thinking makes it so. Meaning that what is perceived as good and what is perceived as bad is really just subject to how you think about it. But there could be a constructive purpose to even the ugliest of ugly and the nastiest of plans to push at least a portion of humanity, maybe more so, into the state that they are to become. And that's an evolved species. It's just a thought.
Well, let's say that you've got a universe there, and you've got good and evil as kind of yin and yang, right?
Right.
And that's what makes you've got a free will universe constructed around good and evil, right? And that's what makes the whole education of souls or development of souls process work. Okay. And so that's the formula for creating densities of consciousness in universes as a technology for developing souls. You know, you've got all of these components. Even so, I would find it very distasteful to incarnate as an evil soul, a density evil soul, where I get my soul development points by knowingly being so evil that I will then go to 6 density heaven, which supposedly by some cosmologies is how the Adolf Hitler type souls evolve. Now, that is what I've read in some cosmologies, okay? I find it very difficult. Like, I would find it really, really difficult to, like, oh man.
Yeah, point well taken.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's just a thought. You know, again, the universe is so that I shouldn't say the universe anymore.
No. I'm saying no. That is how this universe functions, because free will. We have good, we have evil.
Right.
You know, the Lucifer had the free will to say yay or nay
Right.
Every soul has the free will to do this or that, and these universes are machines for soul development. So everything that happens in these are like plays that refer to something else.
That's right.
Yeah.
So when I say, you know, the universe is intelligent, maybe I should start saying the omniverse
Yeah.
is so intelligent that there's a method to its madness in what we perceive as polarity and good and evil and complete opposites. You know, there's another point. I don't know how much time we have, but
yeah, we have time.
okay, I'm gonna have to go soon. I'm gonna have too much longer.
Yeah. So
yeah.
So just to finish up here.
Yes.
Because a density shift between densities of consciousness, which is what this shift is about, from third density to fourth, fifth density, is a complex omniverse maneuver that comes about theoretically either every 25,800 years, 800 plus years, or 75,000 plus years. Like the shift between the Kali Yuga and the Satya Yuga comes around theoretically every 75,000 plus years, according to some cosmologies. Like it's a super whammy, according to some cosmologies, what's coming around now. And supposedly the Blu-ray ETs that contacted Dr. Marie Batchelor, I focus on stuff like this because I'm an exopolitician.
I know.
You know, so we like to know who's on first, who's on second, who's on third. and they were around, and they invented the Vedas and the Yugas. They gave us that knowledge, and that knowledge, those are the cycles and the cyclical structure that is behind the shifts between densities of consciousness, that I like to say it's like cycles in a washing machine. Think of third and fourth, fifth density as like, you know, you're washing souls. It's soul development, and you throw your dirty laundry into third cycle. It goes, you know, rinse and wash, rinse and spin. And then the spin cycle, if your laundry is clean, you can send it up to spin up to fifth density. But if it's not clean, it's got to go be washed again. So you throw it back to third density.
I love that analogy.
So I've been trying to get that analogy through to say, look, that's what's going on.
That's a neat analogy. Wow. Well, you can think of the spin cycle, or the cycles that are inclusive of washing a piece of clothing, as reincarnational cycles, right?
Exactly.
So many people these days are talking about reincarnation as if it's something that is indicative of we're recycled souls. So where are we going? We're not evolving, we're revolving, literally.
No, we are evolving because we are God. In other words, it's not that God is inside us, is that we are God according to the holographic principle.
Well, I guess I'm speaking more of coming back to third density and over again. This density would seem to be like a recycling of that washing.
No, but there's a regularity to it. You know, like it takes you 4 years to get an undergraduate degree. It takes you 25,800 or 920 years to get a degree from the Kali Yuga. So make sure you don't flunk the final exam, because otherwise they're going to send you back.
Right. Well, it depends on how we look at it. But
Okay, yeah, how they look at it. You get it? I see. It's school. It's not the end of the world.
yeah, classroom. Well, some people call it classroom Earth. I would call it classroom omniverse.
Right, right. Yeah. So kind of the insight of the day is, look, it's just school. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of humorous. I don't know.
I think so. I think it's great. Look, I think that is as hideous as things seem, insidious, hideous. There's so many adjectives we could use right now. Boy, is this an exciting time.
Oh,
We've
yeah,
heard
yeah.
this many times from many people that this is, did we choose to come here? I'd like to think so, because, remember what I said when I emerged from that bathroom? Wow, I wouldn't miss this for anything. So whatever extent that I was processing that experience, I knew it was going to be a hell of a ride. So,
Yeah. Is there any point that you had wanted to share with our audience that you have not had a chance to bring up? Yeah.
I don't think so. Of course, I'll think of several after we sign off. But I'd like to leave what we have discussed with your audience, to let them chew on it for themselves. I think the only thing that I would cap this off by saying is, again, God bless us all. We are, particularly those of us that are proactive in seeking truth. The only thing I would say is sometimes you become so gung-ho on finding the answer, you lose the plot, being the experience itself. Let's embrace the experience, regardless of what it appears to be. We talk about truth as if it's a singular phenomenon or singular revelation. And I have always contemplated whether there are multiple truths, because truth is through the eyes for which we see, figuratively speaking. So again, let's not miss out on that journey. Hence the name of my project, Higher Journeys. And yes, that is a hierarchical connotation. Believe me, I thought about that. I said, why did I come up with that? But I still, but sure, it's just, it's so exciting. It's so exciting. And I have to tell you, having come from mainstream media, starting out as a sports broadcasting network in the beginnings of cable TV in 1986, kind of the beginning, did I ever think I would be here? And when I say here, see this burgeoning, even with all of the controversy and so forth, what we call alternative media, I am delighted to see that this is happening, and Godspeed to everyone that's on this journey.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Now, could you share with our audience your book and how to access your book and your show and how to access your show?
Absolutely. Conscious Musings is available on Amazon as well as Barnes & Noble, and it can be ordered, I believe, through any walk-in bookstore. It's not available on my site. There will be a link to Amazon from my site, but there's a good bit of material around the book's premise on the website that you can find, which is higherjourneys.com, higherjourneys.com. That's where I live online. Well, I shouldn't say, I guess I have several properties online, like many of us, including a YouTube channel, which is simply youtube.com/higherjourneys, facebook.com/higherjourneys, etc. So that is pretty much where you can find me. And as I think you mentioned, I just had a wonderful conversation with our friend Miguel Mendonça about his book, of which you were mentioned. It was a great conversation. I really do encourage for folks to go and listen to that interview, which you can get to on my YouTube channel or Higher Journeys. Went into a direction that I didn't quite suspect. He was quite passionate about some of the nefariousness that's going on right now in this climb we're trying to make toward the shift. So very interesting. I enjoyed the conversation. So I hope everyone will listen to that, tune into that.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank you really for joining us today and for all of the mutual sharing that we did, and all of the heartfelt traveling that we did.
Yes, and thank you for having being a great part of the conversation. I love talking to you, and I hope we get to do it more often. You're wonderful. Kudos to you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.